Australia is home to one of the oldest food cultures on Earth. But over time, many traditional dishes and native ingredients have disappeared, forgotten by history, colonization, and changing lifestyles. Today, we explore 10 lost foods of Australia that most people have never tasted, and some have never even heard of. Let's begin. Murnong, also known as the Yam Daisy, was once one of the most important staple foods for Indigenous Australians. For thousands of years, communities relied on this small plant for daily nutrition. Its roots were sweet, juicy, and easy to cook, often baked in earth ovens or eaten fresh after harvesting. Murnong wasn't just food. It was part of a sustainable system. Indigenous women harvested it with care, taking only what was needed and leaving enough for the plant to grow again. This allowed entire landscapes of Murnong to thrive for countless generations. But when European settlers arrived, everything changed. Large numbers of sheep and cattle were introduced, and these animals quickly destroyed the delicate Murnong fields. Within only a few decades, a food that had fed people for thousands of years nearly disappeared. Today, Murnong is slowly being revived by Indigenous growers and researchers who are bringing this ancient food back to life. It stands as a powerful reminder of Australia's deep food history and the knowledge that sustained the land long before modern agriculture. The Bogong moth once played a vital role in the traditional diets of several Indigenous Australian groups, especially those living near the snowy mountains. Every year, millions of these moths migrated to the cool alpine caves, and this natural event became the center of a major seasonal gathering. For countless generations, Indigenous communities traveled long distances to meet in the mountains, not only to harvest the moths, but also to strengthen cultural ties. These gatherings were moments of celebration, ceremony, and shared knowledge. The moths themselves were roasted over hot coals, creating a nutty, smoky flavor. They were incredibly rich in protein and fat-dense, nutritious food that could sustain people during long journeys. Some groups even ground the moths into a paste for later use, turning them into an energy-rich meal. But as the environment changed and traditional lifestyles were disrupted, these ancient moth feasts slowly disappeared. Modern development, cultural displacement, and environmental pressures have all contributed to the decline of this once important practice. Today, the Bogong moth remains a symbol of a deep cultural tradition, one that highlights the close connection Indigenous people had with the land, the seasons, and the natural world. Nardoo is a small, fern-like plant that once served as an important survival food for Indigenous Australians. Its tiny spores were collected, dried, and then ground into a fine powder. This powder was mixed with water to form dough, which was shaped into small cakes and cooked over warm ashes. For thousands of years, Aboriginal communities knew exactly how to prepare Nardoo safely. The plant naturally contains toxins, but traditional grinding and roasting techniques removed the harmful effects, turning it into a reliable and nutritious food source. Nardoo cakes were especially valuable during harsh seasons when other foods were scarce. They provided steady energy and could be stored for later use, making them essential in times of drought or long travel. However, when Europeans encountered Nardoo, they misunderstood how to prepare it. Without the traditional knowledge passed down through Indigenous communities, the cakes were made incorrectly and, instead of nourishment, the plant became dangerous. This tragic misunderstanding highlighted how vital Indigenous expertise truly was. Today, Nardoo cakes are rarely made, and only a few people still know the traditional methods. They serve as a reminder of the deep survival skills and sophisticated food knowledge that sustained Indigenous Australians across thousands of years. Grey saltbush is a hardy desert shrub that once played an important role in traditional Indigenous diets. Long before wheat or European grains arrived in Australia, Communities harvested the tiny seeds of the saltbush plant and ground them into a nutritious flour. This flour was then mixed with water and shaped into flatbreads, cooked on heated stones near the fire. Even though these breads were simple, they were rich in minerals and provided steady energy in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Harvesting saltbush seeds required patience and skill. The seeds were tiny, and gathering them took time, but the plant was incredibly reliable. It thrived in dry, salty soils where other crops could not survive, making it a valuable staple for desert communities. When European settlers introduced wheat, traditional flours like saltbush quickly disappeared from daily life. Industrial agriculture replaced the old practices, and knowledge of this ancient grain slowly faded. Today, grey saltbush still grows wild across Australia, but the traditional bread-making techniques are rarely practiced. What remains is a memory of a simple, resilient food that helped sustain Indigenous people in some of the toughest landscapes in the world. River mint is a refreshing native herb that once played a quiet but important role in Indigenous Australian life. Found growing along creeks and waterways, its leaves were gathered and brewed into a soothing herbal tea that was used for both nourishment and healing. The tea had a gentle minty aroma and was commonly used to ease stomach discomfort, coughs, and colds. For many communities, river mint was a natural remedy long before modern medicine arrived. Its calming properties made it a trusted part of everyday life. Harvesting it required careful attention to the land. People took only a little from each plant, ensuring the riverbanks remained healthy and the mint continued to grow naturally. This sustainable approach allowed the herb to flourish for thousands of years. But with the arrival of European settlers and the introduction of commercial teas and medical treatments, river mint slowly disappeared from daily use. The knowledge of brewing it as a traditional drink became less common, and today, many Australians don't even know this native mint exists. Yet river mint still grows in the wild, waiting to be rediscovered. It remains a gentle reminder of the natural medicines and deep botanical knowledge that supported Indigenous communities for countless generations. Bunya nuts come from the towering bunya pine, a tree that has stood in Australia's rainforests for millions of years. For Indigenous communities, these massive nuts were more than just food. They were the heart of one of the most important cultural gatherings in the continent's history. Every 3 years, when the bunya trees produced their large, heavy cones, clans from distant regions would travel hundreds of kilometers to the Bunya Mountains. These gatherings were times of celebration, trade, music, and ceremony. Entire communities came together to share knowledge, resolve conflicts, and strengthen relationships. The nuts themselves were nutritious and versatile. They could be eaten raw, roasted in the fire, or pounded into a paste to make cakes. Their flavor was often compared to chestnut, soft, earthy, and slightly sweet. But these grand gatherings were disrupted after European settlement. Forests were cleared, sacred land was taken, and many bunya trees were cut down. As a result, the traditional festivals faded, and with them, the widespread use of bunya nuts. Today, the bunya pine still survives, and some communities are working to revive the ancient ceremonies. The bunya nut remains a symbol of unity, tradition, and the deep cultural roots that connect Indigenous people to the land. Native lemongrass was once one of the most trusted bush medicines in Indigenous Australian communities. For generations, people gathered the long, fragrant leaves and used them to prepare a simple but powerful soup that brought comfort and healing. The leaves were gently boiled in water, creating a warm, aromatic broth. This soup was used to treat fevers, headaches, and chest infections. Its soothing qualities made it a go-to remedy during seasonal illnesses or long journeys. But beyond its medicinal use, native lemongrass soup also played a role in everyday nourishment. It was light, refreshing, and easy to prepare, making it a reliable food in times when other ingredients were scarce. Like many traditional recipes, the soup began to fade from common use as European foods and medical practices replaced indigenous knowledge. Over time, the cultural habits around gathering and preparing native lemongrass were lost in many regions. Yet, the plant still grows across Australia, holding its healing potential. Today, efforts to preserve indigenous food traditions have brought renewed appreciation for this ancient remedy, a simple soup that carried knowledge, care, and connection across generations. Possum stew was once a traditional and respected food source for many Indigenous Australian communities. For thousands of years, possums provided both nourishment and materials for daily life. Their meat was an important source of protein, especially in forested regions where they were plentiful. Preparing possum stew was a slow and careful process. The meat was cooked over low heat with native herbs, roots, and sometimes berries, creating a rich and hearty flavor. Every ingredient came from the surrounding land, reflecting a deep understanding of the environment and its resources. Possum hunting was always guided by cultural rules, though only certain animals were taken, and never more than necessary. This ensured balance and respect for the natural world, a principle that shaped all aspects of indigenous life. But with colonization, hunting laws, habitat loss, and cultural disruption, the tradition of possum stew began to disappear. Many of the practices, recipes, and stories connected to this dish faded as communities were displaced and their ways of life were restricted. Today, possum stew is rarely made, and in many areas it is no longer legally or culturally practiced. What remains is its memory, a reminder of a time when food, land, and culture were deeply connected, and nothing was taken without purpose or respect. Paperbark-smoked fish is one of the most iconic traditional foods in Indigenous Australian culture. For generations, communities living near rivers, lakes, and coastlines used the soft, flexible bark of the paperbark tree to wrap fresh fish before placing it near the fire. As the fish slowly cooked, the paperbark released a gentle, smoky aroma. The moisture inside the bark kept the meat tender, while the smoke infused it with a deep, earthy flavor. This simple method required no metal pans, no oils, and no modern tools, only knowledge passed down over thousands of years. Fishing itself was guided by seasonal rhythms and cultural practices. People knew when certain fish were plentiful, when they were breeding, and how to gather them without harming the water ecosystem. This harmony with nature allowed fish populations to stay healthy for countless generations. But with colonization and industrial fishing, these traditions began to fade. Many indigenous communities were pushed away from their waterways, and their sustainable fishing practices were disrupted. Today, paperbark-smoked fish survives mostly in memory and in the teachings of elders who still know the old techniques. It stands as a symbol of respect for the land, the water, and the deep connection between people and the environment. Witchetty grubs are one of the most well-known traditional bush foods in Australia, and for thousands of years they played a crucial role in indigenous diets. Found beneath the roots of certain trees and shrubs, these large white larvae were a rich source of protein and healthy fats nutrients that were essential for survival in the harsh desert climate. The grubs could be eaten raw for quick energy, but roasting them over hot coals was the most common traditional method. As they cooked, the outside became crispy, while the inside turned soft and creamy, creating a flavor often compared to roasted nuts or eggs. Harvesting witchetty grubs required deep knowledge of the land. Indigenous women, who were the primary gatherers, knew exactly which plants housed the grubs and how to collect them without damaging the environment. This careful approach ensured that the ecosystem remained balanced and that food sources could regenerate naturally. However, like many traditional practices, the use of witchetty grubs declined after European settlement. Changing diets, land restrictions, and cultural disruption meant that fewer people continued harvesting and preparing this ancient food. Today, witchetty grubs are still recognized as an important symbol of indigenous culture, representing resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to live in harmony with the land. These ancient foods tell a story of survival, knowledge, and a deep connection to the land that lasted for thousands of years. Many of these traditions were pushed aside, forgotten, or nearly lost. But each one carries the wisdom of Australia's first peoples, whose understanding of nature remains unmatched. By remembering these foods, we honor that history. And by sharing their stories, we help keep these traditions alive for future generations. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to explore more forgotten foods, cultures, and histories, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can keep uncovering the stories that shaped our world.